I'm Catherine Miller. I'm the founder of the Miller Law Group and director at the Center for Understanding in Conflict, and I am on a mission to change how people divorce and help them divorce with dignity. And this being Mediation Week, I've been interviewing a few mediators to talk about their experiences as mediators. And my guest today, if I can call you that, Simeon, is Simeon Baum. He's the president of Resolve Mediation Services and mediators.com. He's the founding chair of the dispute resolution section of the New York State Bar Association, and he's been training mediators for over 20 years. Welcome, Simeon. Thank you so much for agreeing to this conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. I'm wondering if you'd like me to speak generally about mediation, if you want to ask me anything, or how you'd like to approach this.
Well, one of the reasons why I thought that you would be a particularly great guest, for lack of a better word, is that you have so much experience with mediation in a breadth of situations. And I think that oftentimes people don't realize how many situations mediation is appropriate for. And so on a subject matter question, maybe you could talk a little bit first about the kinds of disputes that you've helped people resolve in mediation.
Sure, I appreciate it. I've been doing this since the early 90s. At this point, I've probably done close to 2,000 mediations. And the training that you mentioned, that's a training for the commercial division mediators. So frankly, a good amount of the work that I do in the mediation area involves commercial or business disputes. Within the business zone, there is a wide range of types of matters, and frankly, my own experience, the matters have involved any kind of business dispute you can imagine: intellectual property, real property matters, securities industry, customer broker disputes, or people within broker dealer disputes. There can be, any number of investment vehicles, private equity, hedge funds, all the wide range of business vehicles that people invest in. All those things go into mediation and get resolved in mediation. There is the entire insurance industry and the reinsurance industry, which were basically, they're like bookies backing up the bets the insurers make, is loaded today with mediation. And for what they call first and third party disputes, in other words, if people have claims for coverage and the insurers are denying them coverage, those matters which would go into court can get mediated. And similarly, if people have made claims against one another, because say whether it's car accidents or construction problems or any number of things, often directors and officers, malpractice matters, you name it, anything that's covered by insurance, those matters, what they call third-party liability matters, also get mediated. So the entire, what we call the tort zone, where people do civil wrongs as opposed to contractual wrongs, all those matters which go into court get mediated. And when I started in this in the early 1990s, and we'd go around and ask people, "Have you done mediations, or what do you think?" People didn't know a thing about it. Today, if we go into bar groups, as you know, I'm active with bar associations, and you ask a room full of 100 or 200 lawyers, have you been in mediation? Have you represented parties in mediation? The vast majority, to the extent they're litigators, will say yes, they have. And now why? I guess is the question. Why does this work? Now you, Catherine, with your center, you guys, as I understand it, are part of the understanding-based model for mediation, which is a really beautiful and deep model for mediation, where you see as central building understanding. And you're very transparent. You keep people together in the room the whole time, as I understand it.
That's correct, as much as possible.
Which is possible. And for many mediators, including myself, and particularly say with commercial matters, although I know Professor Mnookin from Harvard does the same thing in commercial matters. but many would also do the use of caucusing, where we get to talk with people in private settings. And I, as a trainer, love to talk about the approach of the understanding-based model, because it really challenges the mediator to use their true deep mediation skills of building understanding. But I also will use the caucus model. What I find is when people are talking privately, the business people, they might share their strategies, that they're purposely doing strategic withholding, not sharing information that they find might deplete their leverage, or whatever it is in a business context. And these could be highly conflictual zones where emotions run, raging, even among executives, people, insurance people, all kinds of areas. People get pissed off.
Yeah.
And sometimes people ought to be able to talk about those things in a room together. Sometimes having them in breakout rooms, from my experience, is also helpful. And we get to talk about not only the strategic negotiation issues, not only case strengths and weaknesses that people might be comfortable talking about, that way, but also even some of these, emotional, principled, or value types of issues. And so we're able to handle highly volatile, highly conflictual matters. In terms of dollar size, I've mediated embedded employment disputes. I've done hundreds, actually, of employment, discrimination, or those sorts of matters, and those are beautiful for mediation, because you get people together. They can talk about why the significance. There's the monies, and then there's the meanings, and they can talk about the meanings and not just think about it as monies. They can also negotiate the monies. But in my experience, the whole Postal Service had a program called Redress: Resolve Employment Disputes, Reach Equitable Solutions Swiftly. Redress. In about 20 years ago, and they put their employment matters into that program. Those were mediated in a transformative model, which is fostering empowerment and recognition. That's kind of the central organizing theme. The mediator's purpose is not to settle a matter, or even to do problem solving, like the Harvard Negotiation Project people, look at problem solving models in mediation, but rather to help people who are in conflict be able to feel comfortable making choices, to speak, not to speak, to be at the table, to move away from the table, what to share, what deals to make, all of those choices, which then make people feel empowered. And as they feel empowered, for the first time, they're able to have some empathy, not just for themselves, but for the people on the other side of the table. That growth and empathy is the transformation from which the transformative movement takes us in. So in that context, people are able to deal with all kinds of things, and no dollars, in many of these instances, no dollars exchange hands. So on the other end of the spectrum, I've done, billion-dollar, disputes, and some very public, disputes. And we've seen very large dollars get agreed to in a mediation context. So
I think, Simeon, that sometimes people think that mediation is for people who are pretty close anyway, or who aren't that angry, or who are, just need a little bit of a shove to get around the corner to an agreement. And, my experience is that some very high conflict situations can be resolved in mediation. And mediation is, by the way, often used by countries in negotiating diplomatic resolutions between them. And so what is your experience with that? Because I hate it when people think that mediation is a second-class form of justice, or somehow not as good, or makes people more vulnerable than a litigation setting. I think that's actually opposite, but what's your experience?
I couldn't agree with you more, Catherine. I think on two levels, both in terms of the volatility and intensity of emotions, and the nature of conflict, the degree and extent of the rift, as well as this notion second-class justice. What we have in mediation is an opportunity to deal with a matter with deep openness, deep flexibility, and thorough acknowledgement of all the dimensions of a go into a dispute or the challenge in relationships among people. The justice system, among other things, gives us some framework for people making predictions. Well, how's it going to come out in court if we don't resolve this thing? And those predictions are a little bit of a lever, a life lever. But real justice could be a much more subtle thing and a much more refined thing, and not necessarily the kind of thing that a court or a judge, or a jury can offer. What we see in mediation is the total life circumstances, the contract, the intent of the contract, which maybe isn't written in the contract, the life reality that maybe the businesses hit hard times, or maybe the people hadn't anticipated the various occurrences that made it impossible to produce the goods within the time or in the manner that they were ordered to be produced. Or any nature of the business relationships or the investment uncertainties or whatever it is. And what we can do in a mediation is people with an open mind take into consideration both what's on the paper and what might be predictable in the law, but also the life realities of their hierarchical arrangements, their interpersonal relations, their business contexts, even their family contexts, their life needs. All of those things can get addressed and not excluded as immaterial or irrelevant. And when people talk frankly with each other, they can get creative. I think one of the things that we do as mediators is we open potential. We just, and by the way, this is why it's so effective with emotion, high conflict or emotion, is we don't look just at, a legal analysis. We look at what's going on between the people, the tone in which they're speaking, the messages that are being communicated. And the mediator, I don't know, I think you've heard me say this before, Catherine, but I love the Tao Te Ching, okay? To me, that's the mediator's Bible, okay? It's this 2,500-year-old classic with wisdom such as, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. You've probably heard that one. But messages about flexibility, about participation in something bigger than oneself, about the benefit of yielding, a benefit of deep listening. And when a mediator brings into the room deep listening and people who are pissed off know that the mediator is hearing them and see that the mediator is hearing and feel that they're being understood, those emotions have a place to go. They're not being shut out. They're being recognized. And I train, with Steve Hockman, he and I train the mediators for the business court. Steve often says, when asked how many business matters are emotional, he'll say more or less 100%.
Of course. Are people involved?
Yes, exactly.
How else could it not be?
Exactly. And you have to be able to talk with people in ways that show them that you're respectful of them. You get what they're talking about. You're not condescending to them. You're not patronizing them. You're not minimizing them. But you're recognizing what's really going on. As people hear that and see that, they feel better, more willing to trust, to communicate more. And what we do as mediators in conflict is there's a trust deficit. The parties don't trust each other. They project very negative things about one another. In the corporate environment, they circle the wagons, and there's the good guys and the bad guys. And so as we, the mediators, are able to have conversations where people can gain a little bit of trust in the mediator because the mediator's trusting you, the party, and disclosures are occurring and acknowledgement recognition is occurring, more information comes out, more understanding is built, and more of the grist for the deal is developed. Because the deal, when we're deal making, what are we looking for? We're looking for what do people care about, what are their interests? Can they get creative, think about the options? How do they generate solutions to the problem? Do they get really a better understanding what their risk is, the legal risk and the outcomes as they think about how it might turn out in court or not, which is not something we have to tell them. We encourage them to think with us. We can get engaged in the value of thinking together, but to me, the ideal mediator is one who activates in the parties their own mental wheels rolling as they think about what these risks are, and their own ears opening as they hear some of those risks, even from a trial standpoint, from the parties who are not their own team, and get to recognize risk in a more textured and accurate way. I think one of the things we're doing here really is we're blending justice and harmony, the norms of justice and harmony in mediation. If you look at the court system as an embodiment of a kind of practical justice, or the mechanics of justice with all its limitations, that's a piece of it. But then there's also the life actualities, and there's the human relationships. And the mediation forum becomes a place where we can integrate those norms of justice and harmony as people try to work through these different dimensions.
I love that. The mediation is a place where we can integrate justice and harmony. I think that's beautiful, almost poetic.
Thank you.
Do you think, Simeon Baum, that there is any place where mediation doesn't have a place? Is there places where people shouldn't mediate?
Well, I guess I've drunk the Kool-Aid. I have to say that so many times, if this is the question, is there an intractable dispute? What we do is we truncate time. We help people see how it's going to play out a little bit, so we can speed things up that way. Intractability, we're like the water, on the rock, gradually, with erosion, working people through some of the tricky areas that make people stuck. That's what mediators do. So intractability to me is less of an issue. Emotionality is like exactly why people should be. You can't tell the judge from the witness seat how pissed off you are, but you can do it in mediation. Okay. So I think the emotionality or volatility, no, that's not a reason not to mediate. Mediators have to know how to use time too. I mean, sometimes you have to give people a break. Sometimes you got to let people do their homework. Sometimes people need more information. Fine, let them go get their information. They need to take depositions, let them take some depositions. They need to wait for a motion for summary judgment. Sure, go do it. Or maybe don't do it and let the uncertainty from the motion for summary judgment pending, or the possibility of it's being made, be enough for people to think about and to save the resources and use them for the settlement pot. So there are many instances where people would think, no, we've got reasons not to mediate. And many of those times, those are reasons actually to mediate. But what people sometimes say is, okay, Brown versus Board of Education. You're trying to make some major social change. You want the law to change. It's going to, change society. Some could argue that might be a place where you test it through the Supreme Court. On the other hand, if those are like reg neg, there's a whole body of mediation, the public sector mediation, where people mediate large matters where the interest groups can be gathered together. You get representatives from the interest groups and you put them in a room together and let them think through the issues, and maybe they can come up consensually with understandings that can generate regulations or even legislation that might be able to address the needs of the interest groups in a way that everybody can buy into. So on the big public scene for the landmark cases, one could even argue there that there's room for mediation, but some people will say that those cases are, sometimes you need to change the law through the legal system.
Yeah. All right, Simeon Baum, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. It's been really a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.